All right, people, welcome here. I'm Clayton, and of course we have our regular star here.
I don't know how much of a star, but I'm Susan Easton Black.
Well, I do. And
Great to see you, Clayton.
It's good to be here. Always great to do this with you, Susan. And I was thinking again how much of a blessing this is to me, and I hope it will be for everybody else. I think it will.
I hope so.
So we're back at it. Today is Alexander Doniphan. I actually listened to your book. It's on audio.
Whoa. You might be the first.
A lot of them need to be. I'm big on audiobooks. But anyway,
Yeah,
it's
me
on.
too.
I listened through this Deseret Book app or whatever. You pay monthly or whatever. And so I'm an expert, so I'm ready. Not really.
Okay, you can help me out here.
But I do like him, and had a little question about, I don't know if I should be asking this in the podcast or not. It's really more of a lawyer question, but since he was an attorney and he was, a man with a pretty strong moral sense, wanted to, get your thought on it maybe. So he expressed regret, you had said in your book later in life, that he had let so many kind of criminals off because he was defending them, right?
Right, he was so good.
He was very good, and he must have figured, I guess, or known that they might have been guilty. So I guess my question is, what does a lawyer do? And I'm not a lawyer, but I know many lawyers. I know some really great, good people who are lawyers, and I guess, if a person comes to you and is like, hey, I need somebody to defend me, they're accusing me of this, like, does the lawyer go, okay, cool, let me just, talk to the other side and, see what I think, and I'll let you know if I'm your guy? Or does that ever happen? Like, I mean, if you're making your living that way, so, and
I think it's
once
tough.
you're hired,
I think I have a son, like Doniphan, that's a criminal attorney. He always says, hey, Mom, they're alleged criminals. And he doesn't ask them if they did it, because I think then it would be too hard to, to try and prove that they're innocent when you thought or knew otherwise.
Interesting. So he doesn't.
Hey, but you've got a
he almost
great attorney
purposely-
out there, this Jeremiah Morgan. Have you met him? He's out your way in
Yes, I
Liberty.
have.
I think
I
he's
have,
had more cases before the Missouri Supreme Court than even Doniphan. He really is a magnificent man and area authority out there.
So you know him, yeah. He's a newer area authority.
Uh-huh.
And he knows my father, actually. My father is an attorney, I should say. And obviously I think he's a good man. But anyway, I'd be scared to enter that field, maybe because I wouldn't know what to do. But that's interesting that your son almost purposely doesn't ask.
Right.
And, maybe it's not his job to figure all that out, I don't know, just a question
It's a big question.
yeah. But, okay, well, with that out of the way, I'll go ahead and try to bring the spirit here. This is Do What Is Right. Yeah, you'll know this. Do what is right, the day dawn is breaking, hailing a future of freedom and light. Angels above us are silent notes taking of every action, then do what is right. Do what is right, let the consequence follow. Battle for freedom in spirit and might. And with stout hearts look ye forth till tomorrow. God will protect you, then do what is right. God will protect you, then do what is right. God will protect you, then do what is right. There you go.
Great rendition.
Thank you. All right. Well, okay, guys, we are going to dig in to Alexander Doniphan. Please take it away, Susan.
All right. Well, Clayton, we've been on a whirlwind moving the Saints from Jackson to Clay to Caldwell County and just starting them to exit from Missouri to Illinois. But in a desire to say, hold on, let's stop in mid-flight and really give a man named Alexander Doniphan his dues. You've probably seen there's a Doniphan Highway out there where you live, Clayton, and there's. Have you been on that one?
Been on drive to on it all the time on the way to Temple.
There's Doniphan Elementary School.
I've been to Doniphan Elementary School. I've not because I went there but for work actually to fix some HVAC stuff.
Okay, so Alexander Doniphan, he's a big name out there in the state of Missouri, and I've heard at different times there's going to be a movie made. We know there was a short TV series with him in it that was part of the Profiles of Courage series done by John F. Kennedy. And so for us to just kind of mention his name in passing, I thought, oh, come on, let's give him his dues and give him a chance so that Latter-day Saints could know more about this man. So here's the look of Alexander Doniphan. He stood, about 6'3". I probably wouldn't have wanted to tangle with him. Maybe you not either.
Probably not. So, I've got an inch on him, but he's pretty much a. I can't use the word I'm thinking of. He's he's very courageous and strong.
Right, impressive in character, at least as it relates to justice. So we're going to do a biographical sketch of his life. As we do so, we start him out in Kentucky. And as we do so, we know that he has an amazing heritage of military men in his family. His grandfather, Mott Doniphan, his father, Joseph. And notice Alexander Doniphan, he's born just 3 years or so after the prophet Joseph. So they're in the same time period, different in the fact that whereas Joseph's born in Sharon, Vermont, Doniphan's down in the Deep South. And with the Deep South look, we look at his life there in Kentucky, and we discover in his childhood that when Doniphan is just 4 years old, his father dies. And you realize that could be poverty for a lot of families back then, but not for Doniphan's. For him, his father actually willed him a slave and willed him acreage. And we'd say, wow, for his time period, perhaps kind of silver spoon in the mouth, but not really. For a Southern gentleman, although there's a chance in his case that he had land given to him at an early age, land wasn't what was viewed as great because land was almost free for the taking. And so for Doniphan, he needed to be an educated man to really be a Southern gentleman. And so he actually left home from his mother, who had been raising him, and attended what was called the Augusta College at 14 and graduated at 18. Now, not many of us could say that. How about you, Clayton?
College? No, that was my high school years.
Yeah, we're looking more high school, but his chance then for graduation is good for Doniphan. He had a special bent towards literature, but literature at the time is not going to make you a living, and so he needs some kind of trade, a career. And one man that took notice of him was a man named Martin Marshall, and said that he would tutor him in the study of law so that Doniphan could become an attorney. Now, back then, very few chances for any kind of law school, and so how you became a lawyer is you found somebody that would tutor you And in the case of John Marshall, he's a brother of the very famous Chief Justice John Marshall. And so for Doniphan, you'd say for his time period, he chose the right tutor, and some will say that John Marshall was actually not as brilliant as this Martin Marshall that tutored Doniphan. Well, once he has been tutored in law, notice he's able to pass the state bar in not just one state, but two states. So in Kentucky, Ohio in 1829, and Missouri in 1830. And for Doniphan, some people want to come home and back to family and make their career there surrounded by family. But in his case, he was anxious to move on. He liked New Frontier. There was always greener pastures. And so he headed to the state of Missouri, and in Lexington Falls set up his practice. And always where you would set up practice, they have these little town squares, and you would find a building or pretty close to the courthouse around the town square. And when asked how was he doing in Lexington Falls as an attorney, notice what he said. He said that for the attorneys there in town, he said, we might have been more successful attorneys had we stayed in our offices more and out of the woods, in other words, hunting, or at parties, or in political caucuses less. And so Doniphan is going to support himself, but if you're having a party, he'd be the first to want to come. And that's a man. He's a single man. Now, if you were to say, how good was he? Doniphan never was a scholar in his presentations in court. He wasn't one where you'd say he hit the books and now he's ready to defend, and he always liked defending criminals or alleged criminals. But you'd say what he was particularly good was theatrics. And so when he would stand up, he would in any court case, he would sit there as the prosecution would go forward. He'd look bored. He'd even turn around and talk to people in the audience, flick off a fly. But when it was his time to speak, he just demanded attention. And so for that, one of his partners along the way was named David Rice Atchison. And this man had actually served in Congress representing Missouri. And he said of Doniphan, I was familiar with the city of Washington in my early manhood. I knew all the great men of our court. They're always in the 5th District Court there in Missouri in the early days. So he said he knew Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun, John Quincy Adams, who becomes president, and others. He said, I have presided in the United States Senate when Clay, who's always viewed as the best speaker of the Senate, literally years later, and Webster and Calhoun sat before me. But he said, I knew Alex Doniphan. He's very close to him, and he said, since 1830. And I tell you, sir, when he was in his prime, I heard him climb higher than any of them. And so, as you look at it and you say, who would you like to have heard speak? Who could have held you spellbound? And you would have said, oh, defend me, defend me. And it was Alexander Doniphan. And how he got so many clients was the men that were going to face the judge, they would sit in the back. Doniphan would then present a case for one man, and the other men in the back would look at who they had hired as an attorney, and they would actually ask Alexander Doniphan to sit through their court case and for him to give the closing argument. And so he didn't always just defend the people that had hired him, but he stayed to be able to show the other attorneys, hey, you need a good closing argument, I'm your man. So then as we learn about his big talent, the question is, when does he first meet then the Latter-day Saints? Recall, as we talked about the missionaries to the Lamanites, you get Peter Whitmer Jr. and Oliver Cowdery and Parley P. Pratt and Ziba Peterson coming into Jackson County there. And as they did so, recall that Peter Whitmer Jr., He's a tailor by trade. And so Alexander Doniphan meets these men and actually has then Peter Whitmer make a suit for him. So that's the first kind of interaction you get Doniphan then with a Latter-day Saint. The next we learn of Doniphan is that by 1836, as the Saints have crossed over in 33 from Jackson County, and they're in Clay County in 36, they're there at the very time that Doniphan is elected to the then House of Representatives there in Jefferson, Missouri. And it's Doniphan, as we'll recall, that wanted a new county to be created where the Latter-day Saints could live in safety. And as a result of his kind of bombastic pushing forward ability, although he is new there in the assembly, the men vote for him, and the Saints are allowed to move up to Caldwell County, which becomes, in a sense, our reservation. We find that, notice you'd say he's got to be one of the most eligible bachelors in the whole state of Missouri at that point. I mean, by this point, he's got land, he's an attorney, he's elected official in the legislature, and he's not married. And so the woman that captured his heart was this Elizabeth Jane Thornton when she was only 16 years old and he's 29. And he sees her. He loves her. They're married on her birthday, December 21st, 1837. He builds her a house. He loves this Elizabeth Jane. And he always said that for sure he loved her, but he really liked the fact that her education wasn't exceptionally great, and he liked that he could educate her. One of the things that they enjoyed as a couple is that she would read to him, and that seemed to be one of his very, very happy times. They had 2 children, and one born 1838, another 1840. One is named after her father, John Thornton Doniphan, and then Alexander after Doniphan that we're talking about. Okay, next we're going to find that as he's now a newly married man, he's an attorney by trade. He's represented then Clay County in the Missouri legislature. He's at home with the session has come to an end. He's served as a private in the Clay County militia. So back then, every able-bodied man that's 18 to 45, they had to register, and everybody becomes a private. Now, Doniphan had no plans that he wanted to rise up in military rank. That was not, his forte at the time. It hadn't been on the table. But suddenly he goes from a private to a brigadier general because he receives a letter signed by Lilburn W. Boggs, the governor, who now indicates that he has a change of assignment in the militia. He's now the brigadier general, and that his responsibility first is to take his militia up to then where the Latter-day Saints are in Caldwell County. Mentioned then is the fact of the extermination order. And for Doniphan, he accepted the new rank, brigadier general, but he said, as far as extermination, I disregard that part of his order. In other words, of the order of Governor Boggs, as he now says, the age of extermination is over. In other words, he had lived to see in Missouri what they had done to Native Americans, and in his mind, not again. We are not going to be part of anything that has to do with extermination. Recall that as he gets up there outside of Far West, he will find that Joseph Smith and other Latter-day Saint leaders are in the process. They're holding a court-martial against them. Doniphan, who's met Joseph now, he now determines that he will defend them. He says of that military tribunal that it was as illegal as hell. And the reason he said they'd never belonged to any lawful military organization. In other words, what are you doing trying men who have never been in the military, and yet you're holding a military court-martial against them? He goes, no, no, no. In other words, that violates military law. Well, at the end of the court-martial, recall that it was General Samuel D. Lucas, the one-time county court clerk there in Jackson County, who's now the general. And he now says to Doniphan, take the prisoners out to the public square in Far West and execute them. The great line of Doniphan is as follows. He writes back and, written to Samuel Lucas, and he writes, it is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. My brigade shall march for liberty. In other words, I'm going home tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm out of there. And if you execute those men, in other words, the plan, your plan to shoot them there at the center of Far West, which is basically our temple site. And if you execute those men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal. So help me God. Well, try and imagine this Samuel Lucas is seeing Doniphan in action. He knows that Doniphan wins. You want to pay for an attorney is going to not just help your cause, but is going to win your cause.
That's right. He's been in court, I guess, maybe.
Right.
With,
in other words, Lucas
doing
is
the notes
seeing,
or whatever while Doniphan's in action.
He's seeing Doniphan in action. He's seeing this theatrical man that would start and he'd unbutton his sleeves, and by the time he's standing up, his sleeves are under his armpits, and it's like he's going into battle. And when he says to this kind of shrivelly guy, he goes, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal. In other words, I'm going after you. You get those men, I'm going after you. And he says, so help me God. Well, okay. We know that Doniphan then is a momentary review at the Richmond hearing before Judge Austin King.
Can I?
Yeah.
I should have said this a few sentences earlier, but it's probably safe to say that had it not been for Doniphan, the leaders of the church would have been executed. Do you think that's safe to say?
Joseph still has a lot to do. I would hope somebody else would rise up. Because Nauvoo is everything. Nauvoo's temples, as we know it, family forever, and King Follett Discourse. The list goes on and on. But
obviously that was not part of the plan. I don't think that, God would have let that happen. But it seems like the way that it did happen was through Doniphan. Would you say that?
Oh yeah, Doniphan is such a hero to me, and it's like. Obviously the Lord used him and his, sense of, everybody has their own sense of how you define integrity, but his own sense of right and wrong. There's no question, he was used at the time in the hands of the Lord to help a prophet of God. But notice Doniphan, it's like he wins with all these alleged criminals. One of my favorite stories is he's in court. A guy is accused of murder. Doniphan gets him off. The murderer stays seated in the court, and the courtroom erupts. They're cheering, and they carry Doniphan outside on their shoulders. In other words, everybody loves his performance.
Right. While the guy who won, who was accused of murder, was just sitting there probably.
Yeah, just sitting there. So you'd say Doniphan seems to win at everything unless he's defending Joseph Smith. And here's Richmond hearing. Doniphan now says to Joseph, as the case is going forward, is there enough evidence to hold him over for a trial? Doniphan says if a cohort of angels, in other words, thousands, cohort about 2,500, were to come down and declare we were innocent, in other words, we meaning Sidney, Parley, Hiram, others, if we were innocent, it would all be the same, for he, king, the judge, had determined from the beginning to cast us into prison. So much for the legality of the court system, right? Well, decisions had been made. Well, at this point, we know that Doniphan also defended Joseph in Liberty's back and forth. His house was right next to the Liberty jail. And he actually shared with Joseph legal law books so Joseph could study. But notice Doniphan didn't do this free. And I guess of all the things I wanted to talk about that was he wanted to be paid. And he sent a bill to Joseph Smith after Joseph escaped from Liberty Jail. And the bill was for $5,000. Now, $5,000 is a lot of money today, but back then it's huge, right? You get a dollar, $3 an acre, and suddenly he wants $5,000. I mean, he's been there defending Joseph from the military tribunal to the Richmond hearing to Liberty. And so Joseph now passes the bill to his bishop, Newell K. Whitney, and he says, pay this. Now, we all want a bishop like that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where we find one, Clayton, but okay. So he says to Newell K. Whitney, I want you to pay this. Well, Newell K. Whitney, I mean, they've come right off the extermination order. It's not like they have a secret stash of cash. And so Whitney begins to negotiate with Doniphan. And as he does so, the conclusion is, remember those lands of inheritance that the saints had back in Jackson County? We've abandoned them, but we still hold the title. And so how was Doniphan paid? How do you pay off that $5,000? He's paid in over 1,000 acres in Jackson County. Now, notice most of that's the Independence area. I mean, you're talking, at this point, 1,000 acres, you're talking, hey, that's huge. And Doniphan, it was like law was the golden egg. And then as a goose would lay more eggs, he'd spread out. And he went into banking. He went into, even like an education part, that William Jewell College back there. And he also then went especially into real estate. And he took those acres. And at one point, Joseph is asking Newell K. Whitney, have you settled my indebtedness to Doniphan? And Whitney says, yes. I paid him off in acreage in Jackson County. Joseph will contact Doniphan and say, don't take it. In other words, hold out for cash.
So was this before the agreement had been made or kind of after already?
A little bit after, but Joseph was hoping he was still in time and don't take it. And said under Doniphan's hands that this acreage would be cursed. And Doniphan thought that was really funny. I mean, here's this prime property there in the greater Independence area, and so he kept it. Now, jumping ahead, but I think it's so fascinating.
What was it Joseph said about it? The day will come that...
that there just won't be even, like hardly a smokestack that would be standing, under your hands. In other words, let that property go. And so you follow through the Civil War, and we know that of all the states, Missouri couldn't decide which way to go. Should they support the North? Should they support the South? And you don't make a decision, you're going to get beat up by both troops, right? You got to take a stand. And by not taking a stand, you've got Northern forces, Southern forces going through. And finally, at the war's end, Doniphan, who'd sat out the war in St. Louis, decided, hey, he wanted to go see his holdings. How did everything make it through? And anyway, he's riding a horse there in Jackson County with a nephew. And he's talking, and they're looking over their land is just destroyed. And, no houses on all this property, though, nothing's growing. And Doniphan says to his nephew, well, I want to tell you how I got this property. You ever heard of Joseph Smith? And they're talking, and the nephew says, well, do you think old Joe was a prophet? And Doniphan looks over this complete destruction, and he goes, well, you tell me. So we know something about how he was paid, and He should have listened to the prophet and held out for cash if he really wanted the money. Well, what else happens to Doniphan is he's elected to a second term in the state legislature. At one point, he's hired again to defend a Latter-day Saint. This time it's the man in the corner, or in Puerto Rockwell, it would probably scare anybody in an alley, right? But he was charged with the attempted murder of Boggs. So the question is, was Orrin Porter Rockwell in town when Boggs was shot in May of 1842? And the answer was he was there in Independence. He had taken his wife there to town. She's demanding a separation, and Boggs had his home right across from the local tavern. There's an account that the would-be assassin then approached the window of the kind of study of Boggs and shot him. And what he shot him with, it wasn't a single bullet, but it was buckshot. And the buckshot went into Boggs' neck and down into his chest. And Boggs then falls on his table. And the question is, who shot him? Orrin Porter Rockwell, his comment was, I didn't shoot Boggs. If I had shot him, he would have been dead. And he held to that. And you get Alexander Doniphan will defend him. Well, Orrin Porter Rockwell eventually is off. What happens to Boggs? I think it's pretty interesting. He's shot at the time he's running for senator to represent Missouri in Washington, D.C. He's elected on a landslide. And when he gets back to the Senate, he gets the nickname, and longest nickname I've ever heard of, Clayton, but it is man whose head is full of balls. And he had the habit, he'd play with his skin. And what he's doing, he's trying to work out these the buckshot that's gone in his neck down to his chest, and he'd push and pull, and he'd go, see, I was shot. And they'd say, truly, sir, you're a man whose head is full of balls. Well, okay. So leaving Boggs, we know
did that have the connotation that it does today? I just have to ask. I don't know if the balls thing had the connotation that, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Like today, we wouldn't use that term, but yeah, I don't think the same connotation, but for sure it was a put down at Boggs. Okay. Well, you'd say, what else is Doniphan doing? He invests more and more in business and land partnerships. He's one of your big landowners in the state of Missouri at one point. Well, moving on, the U.S. enters a war with Mexico in 1846. Doniphan, now still a brigadier general, he will volunteer to fight in the Mexican War. He was an amazing hero in that war. He was as famous as Zachary Taylor. At one point, when what was called the Mormon Battalion came into Santa Fe, Doniphan and his men had already captured the town, and they gave Doniphan demanded a 100-gun salute to honor the Mormon Battalion as they came into Santa Fe. He said, I was pleased to find a number of old acquaintances and friends. So I like Doniphan. He's impressed by the Latter-day Saints, the mere fact that they're serving a country that in many respects by this point had not served them well.
There's not many people I can think of that would have done the 100-gun salute for the members of the church at that time.
No,
I can't think of anybody. I think
he stands alone. Well, okay, all you out there that are still having children, haven't named all your kids, think Doniphan. You can't go wrong.
And actually, Joseph Smith named a son Alexander.
Yeah, Alexander.
Right?
Yeah. So as he got older, and it probably happens to all of us, after the Mexican War, he goes around and gives talk after talk after talk, and there's so much adulation, and finally he's like, I'm done with it. He's done with wanting to be a public figure. He kind of moves back into law, into business, but he doesn't have the same theatrical zeal, and he's not as successful. They ask him to run for Congress. He's asked to run for governor, and he doesn't want to do it. He just kind of wants to be the family guy. He's done what he could for the United States. And you get during this time, both of his sons will die tragic deaths. You know, one accidental poisoning, another one accidental drowning. And Doniphan deeply sorrowed over this. I mean, he said he'd given his sons the best education possible for the time. And his wife, even more depressed. She never, it's hard for her to get out of bed. And in this, for the first time, Doniphan and his wife look to try and find a church, and they get very involved in what was called the Liberty Christian Church, and Liberty, after the town they lived in, a Christian church. And so Doniphan's struggling. You
said her health has declined.
Yes, her health declining, and it's like, he never quite gets it back in life. And so as we move along, then you've got another big issue that has, but nevertheless, his reputation's out there larger than life. And, despite the fact he's not actively seeking for the reputation, it's like it grows legendary. And at one point, the question is, which way is Missouri going to go as we start to look at, slavery, not slavery? Are we with the South? Are we with the North? And for Doniphan, he opposes Missouri then wanting to break off from the United States. And the interesting thing, at the time, he actually owns 5 slaves. And he's president of the Clay County Pro-Slavery Aid Association. And so you'd say, but for him, he opposes stopping being part of the United States. But he is sent then to represent Missouri at what was called the Washington Peace Conference in February of 1861, with the idea, perhaps if we all got together, we can avoid what looks like will be a civil war in our country. Well, in February then of 1861, off Doniphan heads to Washington, D.C. And when he gets there, obviously the big man at the time, elected president of the United States, is Abraham Lincoln. And as Lincoln meets Doniphan, Lincoln is aware of the legacy of Doniphan, particularly as it relates to the Mexican War. And Abraham Lincoln says of Doniphan, "You're the only man I've ever met who, in appearance, came up to my previous expectation." There are many different quoted responses. I guess I like this one best from Doniphan. He looks at Abraham Lincoln and says, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't give you the same compliment." In other words, I'm looking at you and, wow, our nation's in your hands. He had something more to say about Abraham Lincoln. He said the following: "It is very humiliating for an American to know that the present and future destiny of his country is wholly in the hands of one man, and that such a man as Lincoln, a man of no intelligence, old Abe, is simply an ignorant country buffoon." And so if you were to say, would Doniphan like to be Abraham's best friend? I go, no way. And so you'd look and you'd say, how does he feel about this man leading the nation? He's not impressed. But nevertheless, for Doniphan, he's not going to fight against a flag that he's carried. And so for him, as the Civil War goes forward, Doniphan now, he comes home. His friends are all geared up. They want to be for the South, and Doniphan doesn't. And suddenly Doniphan, who's been held in high esteem wherever he's gone, he's no longer in high esteem in Clay County and other places out in western Missouri. And so what he does is he moves to St. Louis, and he basically sits out the Civil War. He practices law. He does military cases of widows and children.
The saints basically sat out the war too, right? Brigham
Yeah,
Young
saints
kinda
are
said,
pretty much sitting out
"Sorry."
the war. I mean, Brigham says to Lincoln, over telegram message, he said, "We'll defend the telegraph lines in Utah, and basically the war's yours." And so Doniphan is doing the same thing.
It's interesting that he was kind of with the saints on the sitting out the war. Maybe there
Yeah,
were
and
others
sitting
who
out
did,
the
but-
war, horrible war. And during this time, his wife will die at age 51. And for Doniphan, he'll never remarry. He said, "Her loss was the misery of my life." And that's, I don't know, I call that true love. What do you call it, Clay?
Definitely, and that was when I listened to your book on him. That struck me a bit, that it would be a very sad thing to, at the end of your life, all your posterity, your two sons and your wife, both die before you.
Yeah,
It just seems like that would be really sobering and just really tough.
really tough for him. Well, so how does he spend the next few years of his life? For Doniphan, he views himself, he's now 67 years old. He views himself old age. He recognizes he's not as good at the law. He's lost the spark of the theatrics, and he's just kind of walking through it and doesn't feel like he's given his all for the clients. He's lost what you're talking about, a lot of joy in life. His wife's gone, his kids are gone, and now what's available for him? We know that one thing that he does, and kind of typical of older people, I think, is that he determines, hey, I'm going to travel. I'm going to go back and see some of the places he'd been through with, the Mexican War. And one of the places he goes is Salt Lake City. He's more than welcomed. One of the big things he does is that he moves to Richmond, Missouri, lives in a hotel. It used to be hotels back then. Their bread and butter, which you could always count on, is that bachelors lived in hotels because they had someone that could make their food, clean their clothes, give them room and board, and so while he's there in Richmond living at a hotel around the General Square, that David Whitmer is being accused of denying his testimony of the Book of Mormon. And with Alexander Doniphan still with this, amazing, legendary reputation that's just growing and growing, that David Whitmer comes to see him. David Whitmer had run a livery stable there in Richmond for years. He'd actually been at one point the mayor and a councilman, and he goes to see Doniphan, and he wants Doniphan to just write saying that basically he knows David Whitmer's an honest man. And Whitmer is now saying, hey, I've never denied my testimony as one of the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon. And so for our church, that was one of the great things, another great thing that Doniphan did for us. Well, in addition, we're going to find that while he lived in Richmond, it was said that he would leave his hotel and he would try to walk around the block, and it'd take him all day. Kind of like people wanting to stop and ask him, and he loved to tell old stories. But finally, death gets the best of Doniphan. He dies of bronchitis and congestion. He's now 79 years old. It's been a long time since he's seen his beautiful young bride. And where he's buried right there in Liberty, Missouri. He's got one of the large tombstones there in the Fairview Cemetery. And now, kind of in conclusion about Doniphan, as we think about this man, he was important to the nation as it relates to the Mexican War. He was important in Missouri, unable to make a stand. In other words, I'm not going to fight against the flag that I carried into battle. And his sitting out the war was a big statement. But more than that, he was sure important to Latter-day Saints. And no doubt, as you said, Clayton, he was the right man at the right time to literally preserve the life of Joseph Smith and Hiram and others. I mean, he wasn't perfect in any sense, but he was sure great. And maybe that's a message for all of us, that the Lord can use the people willing to stand up for truth and willing to fight for justice. And that was certainly him. So, I hope that there are many more schools and highways named for this man, and that he will be featured in some full-length movie and portrayed by just the right guy to show a man of such amazing integrity and caring about others.
And that, in the afterlife, he's going to be remembered by some important people. He's got some good friends up there, right? So
yep, I would think so.
I would think he's got some good friends.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned that the temple work has been done for him.
Yeah, temple work is done for Alexander Doniphan, his wife, and his sons. But you're right. What a tragedy that hit him in old age to lose his wife and all his posterity. And then the question is, now what? And basically, as he leaves his, his inheritance, he leaves a large portion to the lady that ran the hotel there in Richmond, as he's, grateful for her caring for him as he, his struggles in life. And he talked about that he became quiet. If you don't complain a lot, you get more help than those that are that are complaining. And so I think, I liked him. What did you think?
It's hard not to like him.
It's hard not to like him.
When I brought up the lawyer thing, partly because I don't know, I just have I don't know how to resolve that, and there are many things I don't know how to resolve. But so I'm curious to know what he would have done, maybe a little differently, were he to go back. But it's I don't know anybody who would have, who is a more honest lawyer. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think you're saying it's good. There's sometimes in life when we have questions and, the answers are slow in coming because, how do you defend someone that you might think is guilty but deserves a right to have a fair trial?
Yeah, and everybody deserves a right for a fair trial, and maybe you're there to make sure the other guy isn't trampling over him and is sticking to the facts. And if they say something that's over the line, you're there to say, hey, you don't know that, and but maybe you don't necessarily have to, lie or deceive and say stuff that you don't know is right either. I don't know.
Right.
All right, Susan. Well,
next time we're off to Quincy, we're going to follow the Saints, leave Doniphan now behind, and follow the Saints to Quincy, Illinois, and then, if all goes well, start moving them up towards a place we call Nauvoo.
That's kind of a peaceful, kind of a happy time for the Saints, right?
Yeah, it's a happy time.
10 years or so that they were there? Or?
Not quite, but moving towards it.
Okay, well, longer than independence.
Longer than independence, that's
far
for sure.
west. Okay, guys, thanks for being here again. If you wanna read another book Susan's written, Susan, you wrote a book about another great man of our time, acting president of the Quorum of the 12.
M. Russell
Ballard.
Yeah.
So tell us about that real quick. What did you learn, or what were your big takeaways from that experience writing his biography?
Well, okay. To write, mostly I write about people who are not living, but to write about someone who is living and to read his journals and then turn in what I've written and have him red mark it. This isn't right. This isn't right. It's a pretty humbling experience, but I think what I learned the most about him, and I think we could probably learn that about everybody, was how the Lord moved in quiet ways in his life, and how in his case he seemed to just always make the right choice. And I was amazed. I mean, he grows up with in a home when parents aren't active, and yet he stops going up to the cabin on the weekend because he wants to go to church and be with his quorum. And you're like, oh wow, what a great kid.
Yeah, who does
so he's
that,
a great
right?
kid, just an amazing man, and the choices he made blessed both of our lives.
That's pretty special that you got to do that. And
It was.
I haven't read it yet, but I kind of hope to. So available for sale now. All right, guys, we'll close off with I'll do just the last two verses of this hymn. I thought it was interesting. Do what is right. I think some person in charge of music or something in the church said something like that it was kind of unfortunate that this hymn the words were set to a tune that was only this good or something. So he apparently didn't love the tune. I
like what
I think
you've
it's
done with
okay.
it.
Here we go, verse 2. Do what is right, the shackles are falling. Chains of the bondsmen no longer are bright. Lightened by hope, soon they'll cease to be galling. Truth goeth onward, then do what is right. Do what is right, let the consequence follow. Battle for freedom in spirit and might. And with stout hearts look ye forth till tomorrow. God will protect you, then do what is right. Do what is right, be faithful and fearless. Onward, press onward, the goal is in sight. Eyes that are wet now, ere long will be tearless. Blessings await you in doing what's right. Do what is right, let the consequence follow. Battle for freedom in spirit and might. And with stout hearts look ye forth till tomorrow. God will protect you, then do what is right. God will protect you, then do what is right. It's good when you do it like that, right?
Oh,
it's a good
really
tune.
good.
It's a part of it's in the arrangement, not just tune. I think it's a good tune. All right, guys. Well, that is it. We will come back and talk about Quincy. And Susan, any last words? Always give
You're
the
great.
opportunity.
Thanks for listening to us, and thanks, Clayton.
You're welcome. All right. See you guys later. Okay, guys, I found that actual quote from the church music guy. His name is J. Spencer Cornwall, and he was the director of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in 1935 for the next 27 years. But if you are interested to know what he actually said, he says, "It is regrettable that such a forthright, positive challenge as is found in this hymn could not have been traditionally associated with more worthy music and a less ignoble connotation." So I presume he didn't think the music was the greatest. And as far as the less ignoble connotation, I presume he's referring to what that music was set to previously. which was a tune called The Old Oaken Bucket, which was a song about a bucket, like an oak bucket that you lower into a well and to get water. Nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just really plain, but yeah, that's all it's about. And there's another kind of text that it was set to, and that was a poem by Thomas Moore, who is an Irish poet. And the poem kind of work or whatever is called Lalla Rookh, if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's an Oriental romance. And I don't know anything wrong with the romance either, but, just nothing sacred. So I'm sure you were dying to know what that was all about, and that is the answer. I'm sure you weren't really dying to know what that's all about, but that is your answer. All right. See ya.